Before the West called her by a storm's name, she was Martha Jane Cannary or Canary in some ledgers because clerks and winds spelled differently. A Missouri beginning, 1850s light on creek water wagons that sounded like decisions, a family that moved the way hope moves forward because anything else felt like standing still. Childhood on the road as a teacher, without recess. You learn which boards rattle in the wagon floor, which mules sulk, which clouds are simply making a face and which will actually weep on you before noon. Loss came early. Father's shoulders suddenly empty of plans. A mother's hands that had held everything together going still. The sort of silence a child notices before adults admit it. Martha became useful the way water becomes cold in shade. Without ceremony, she cooked when a pot needed filling. She soothed younger ones when nights were long. She learned that kindness and work are the same words spoken at different temperatures. Some histories make neat lists: her life preferred braids, dishwasher, cook, dance hall worker for, a season when coins were thin, freighter's hand when freight needed hands, nursed by instinct long before someone called her that. Somewhere on the road between jobs and judgments, Martha leaned into a saddle and discovered that a seat built for distance was as close to home as the map had offered her so far. Horses don't gossip. They cross country. They accept a rider on proof, not rumor. Clothes followed the work. Buckskins rode better than bustle. Boots outlasted shoes. Had wide enough to carry rain made more sense than a ribbon pretty enough to collect it. Men looked twice at first, then looked forward when they learned she could drive a team through a royal mud that would swallow a lighter hand. She laughed with her mouth open and swore with words that had learned to be helpful instead of ornamental. And the name Calamity arrived the way nicknames do, but the story told often enough to fit. One version says an officer capped. Egan was thrown in a patch of scraped neck in a dangerous conversation with the ground. Martha rode, lifted, kept a man alive long enough for a doctor to arrive late and say thank you. Call me Calamity if you're my enemy, she supposedly quipped, and Jane if you're my friend. Another version is simpler. Calamity attached to her like birds to a ham. Because Roans remember the most dramatic version of a woman, who insists on occupying them on her own terms. Either way, Martha Jane became Jane to friends and Calamity to the rest of the country. That would learn to put her on broadsides and books when the day-as work slowed enough to allow. Printing, the Platte heard her laugh. Fort Laramie watched her swap reins for a rifle and back again without losing a beat. Camp cooks learned she would eat last if anyone looked hungry first. She rode as a scout sometimes, not the romantic poster kind, but the practical kind a column hires when maps need correction by boot. She reads sign the way a mother reads children, tracks that said who and when, smoke that said where and why, winds that said whether a long day would become a longer night. She drank too, sometimes like a person with more memories than shelves. The frontier sold bottles the way cities sell noise. She bought both in odd seasons and paid for both in mornings. Even so, men who liked to sneer found their mouths closing around respect when she rode into bad places and came back with less bad to argue about. She could hunt without waste, cuss without malice, and dance when a fiddle begged a roan to remember laughter. At stations along the routes north, her name preceded her by a mile and arrived softer than headlines would later teach it to be. Calamity's coming, someone would say, meaning keep a plate warm, keep a cot ready, keep your curiosity polite. She was not tidy. She was not apologetic. She was useful, which is a better compliment west of the 100th meridian than pretty. One winter she sat by a sick boy's bunk for 3 straight nights, rocking her chair with the toe of a boot, counting his breaths and cussing heaven softly when he would not take broth until she told him a story about a horse that refused to be named until it had crossed 3 rivers. He slept. She didn't. In the morning the fever remembered mercy. Jane rode on. The road did not ask permission. It asked for stamina and a sense of humor. She offered both in a voice that could be warm as stew or sharp as a shovel, depending on who had earned which. Country was rearranging itself, telegraphs knitting, railroads plotting, gold whispering in hills that preferred to be left alone. And somewhere ahead of all that noise, a mining camp called Deadwood was busy inventing a poor man's Broadway. Jane would find her way there because the road and the story had decided to meet for a while. And she was a woman who went where the meeting was. Scout, nurse, and the camp that needed both. A column's flank, a river to ford, a smallpox blanket, and a cabin that leaks prayers. and a woman whose hands choose the job in front of them before choosing a legend to wear. There are days when a saddle is the right tool, and there are nights when a chair beside a bed is. Jane knew both rhythms. On the trail she rode a little ahead, not to lead, just to make sure the leading had a place to go. She pointed with her chin, a creek to please with itself, a draw that would bottle riders like beans, a cloud that meant more than weather. In camp she chose work that kept a circle intact, hauling, patching, breaking fights with a sentence instead of a fist when a sentence was willing to do the work. Then Deadwood's breath went ragged. Smallpox walked street to street like a bill collector with too many addresses, doors shut, pans. Water went still on stoves that had not cooled all spring. Voices dropped to the register people use when a room has decided to be a church for a while. Jane stayed, not a nurse by diploma, but by the ordinary decision to stand where standing helps. She washed linens until her hands learned the geography of steam. She carried broth to mouths too tired to want it and told jokes thin enough to float and strong enough to carry a spoonful down a throat. There is a quiet heroism that newspapers cannot print without ruining it. This was that. Rooms where no reporter would bother to write his name on the way, and only a chair, a bucket, a basin, a woman humming a tune whose words had moved away so the tune could do the heavy lifting. The doctor, when there was one, respected her without speech because there was no spare breath. Miners who had known her as the laughing woman with the blasphemous vocabulary now learned her in the slow voice of the fever as friend. Children learned she could make pain hold still for long enough to comb a tangle. At a door where a woman had fallen asleep upright, Jane slid the blanket from an empty pallet over the shoulders that needed it more. At another door where men argued about contagion and the price of courage, she argued back by not moving at all. When the wave eased, Deadwood stepped out into air that felt new. Men whose arms had healed shook hers like a pump handle. Women pressed bread into her hands and said little because gratitude prefers monosyllables. Town returned to being noisier than was healthy. Bars remembered their songs. Cards shuffled until they were satisfied. And Jane, who could be as rowdy as any room when spirits and paydays agreed, carried the new stillness inside her like a small lamp. Her orbit overlapped with the Wild Bill's now, a man who wore quiet like a tailored coat when rooms begged for it. She liked him, not as a poster, not as a dime novel, but as a piece of furniture a dangerous night appreciates having in the corner. Rumors sprouted that they were married, that they were not, that they planned to be, that they never spoke except when the air insisted. Deadwood enjoys rumors the way other towns enjoy parades. Jane did not correct many mouths. She saved her breath for work. On days without emergency, she drove stage. Because reins in her hands looked like they had grown there, she swore at mules affectionately. They answered in their native idiom and obeyed. On other days, she scouted for outfits that paid in questionable currency, promises, thanks, credit against future troubles. The map under her boots was the only ledger she consistently trusted. Deadwood would keep its appetite for theater, and the next act would be brutal. A chair taken by the wrong man, a shot from behind, a saloon reduced to a single small room where silence sat down hard. Jane felt the town tighten even before the report. Some people sent storms a county away. She was built that way. The shot that froze the room, and a woman who wouldn't leave the room alone. Cards in the dust, a name walking uphill toward legend. Jane grieving in the only language she trusted, usefulness. There are moments the West refuses to forget, because forgetting would make the next drink taste wrong. The afternoon when Wild Bill's chair faced the wrong direction is one of them, a crack. Breath dragged through a doorway and held too long, men turning into furniture. Jane arrived in the wake of that noise, found the room trying to make sense of itself as if sense were a table. You could rate level by shoving a matchbook under a short leg. She did what she always did when a scene asked for more than words. She worked. She helped move. The body with a tenderness that made hard men clear their throats and look at their boots. She ran messages in a town that preferred rumors to mail, and made sure the right ears got the right ones anyway. She told a boy to fetch the doctor and told the doctor the facts with less tremor than the floor. Grief sat on her like a coat she refused to remove in case the weather changed back. She did not lecture the town about its appetite for spectacle. She kept the lamps filled and the rooms aired and the quarrels trimmed. Some say she claimed a marriage. Some say she claimed a promise of one. Some say she claimed nothing but the right to sit near the bed where friends took turns being alone together. However the papers printed it, Jane mourned in the steady dialect of chores. Deadwood kept moving, claims to stake, freight to haul. Spats to upgrade into fights and then downgrade into apologies. Jane kept being where people needed not to be alone. She accompanied a prisoner once and stopped a lynch plan by standing beside him, reminding her crowd with her posture that justice prefers furniture and lamps to ropes, and anger, it worked. Not because she was large, not because she was armed, but because she was unmistakably present in a way that talks men down from ledges without a speech. Children chased her across lots with the fierce affection kids save for dogs and ants. She cursed at them with the kind of affection dogs and ants understand. For a while the town's appetite for stories made work for her as well. When a tent show needed a guest, when a traveling journalist needed color, when a poster needed a name that looked like weather, Calamity Jane's pen strokes stood ready. She began to tell her own story in paragraphs that knew their audience, a version of the Egan. Rescue that glowed softly, Pell talk wrapped around small truths like blankets around cold. Children, did she embroider? Yes, but the cloth was hers, and the room she earned with those stitches bought bread for more than one winter, and paid for more than one doctor as visit her pride would have skipped. Between shows she rode stages freighted, helped where camps ran out of hands or courage. She never stopped being the person who could turn a day by picking up the job in front of her and finishing it, while others began to argue about whose job it had been. Country began to change shape again, tracks farther, telegraph faster. Boom towns maturing into towns that looked at themselves in windows and tried to stand up straighter. Jane, too, changed shape according to the wind and the pay. She was a scout when scouting hired, performer when performing fed, a nurse because there are always nights that need one. In the background, a quieter life kept raising its hand. A man named Burke would teach her the grammar of the word husband. A child named Jessie, if you believe the documents you prefer, would learn the math of having a famous mother on thin margins. But fame and peace do not share furniture easily. And the road, which had always been her easiest conversation partner, kept asking for one more ride. Poster boards and parlor stages, the years of telling and traveling. A train ticket pin with a safety pin. A Wild West show tent bright as a second sunrise, Jane on a stool telling a room what courage sounds like when it is tired and still shows up. Traveling shows learned to set up faster than a storm. Canvas went up, flags bragged. Bugles persuaded afternoons to become evenings. Calamity Jane joined more than one such parade, sometimes on the same poster as Buffalo Bill, sometimes with outfits less grand but just as confident they could sell a ticket in a town that had carried the day on its back all week and needed to be carried by spectacle for an hour. She wore buckskins the way she always had, like work clothes. She held a rifle the way she would hand it to a friend who needed it. She told the Egan story and the smallpox rooms and Wild Bill's quiet jokes and enough about herself to pay the printer and the boarding house and the laundry without lying so egregiously that her conscience forgot how to sleep. On stage, she was a strange kind of star, less glitter than gravity. She did not memorize speeches, she recalled rooms. Her audience came to be close to the person behind the name, and she delivered that person, not the invention. Between towns, the old habits tugged. A bottle as ballast, a quarrel with a manager who thought a woman's schedule belonged to him, a sudden gift to a family with a sick baby that left her broke and unashamed. Clinton Burke, husband by papers and testimony some years, comes and goes in the accounts. Like weather between towns, they opened a restaurant once, which is a form of optimism God himself honors with extra sunlight. It did not last long, but the coffee was good while it did, and the chairs knew they belonged to a home instead of an audience. A girl, Jessie, appears in the record like a bird on a fence post, present, observed, capable of flight. Jane's letters, where they survive, are tender and brief, like a person writing at a depot bench while the train breathes. The 1890s turned their pages. The West became museum and newspaper at once. Old stories under glass, new scandals in ink. Jane kept working. Sometimes she was a guest. Sometimes she was the whole show. Sometimes she was a reminder that fame is a tool you can swing at a problem until it solves itself or you tire of the noise. She aged in public and did not pretend not to. Lines came honestly from weather and laughing in nights that went longer than they should have. Her eyes kept their brightness, the kind you see in people who can still find the funny line in a bad paragraph in small towns. She would be recognized in a shop, and the shop would find itself suddenly saved her. Sit. Miss Jane, rest. There's pie left from noon. Her thank you was practical, a story paid for with the coin. She carried attention and a verbal portrait of somebody as cousin who had been brave in a flood or a blizzard. She paid the world back in stories because that is the currency it had always paid her in. Late in the decade, she drifted back toward the Black Hills the way a bird circles a birthplace, without asking the sky to explain itself. Deadwood's hills had not forgotten her. They lifted their shoulders in that old way that says we can keep a secret and keep a friend. The body keeps ledgers even hearts don't see. Coughs speak first. Bones ask for chairs sooner. She gave away more than she kept, which is either sainthood or poor accounting depending on which preacher you ask. The last room, the quiet stone, and the neighbor she was buried beside. A hotel in Terry, a paper box of letters, a grave on a hill that makes jokes about pairing legends and lets the jokes become tenderness. The mining camp of Terry sits like a comma above a long sentence of hills. Boarding houses breathe steam in winter and gossip in every season. Jane found a room there in 1903, bed that apologized for springs, a trunk that had learned to keep quiet, a few letters folded small enough to travel and large enough to mean it. Agnes's kind of tidy was not her kind, but they shared the discipline of saving what a person could not bear to lose. The last weeks were ordinary, which is how good ones often look up close. She visited, she helped, she borrowed, and forgot and paid back with stories that could be spent more than once without wearing thin. On an August day, her breath shortened its sentences. A friend found her quiet as if sleep had moved in and refused to pay rent. Men who had once argued loudly with her about nothing in particular now argued softly about who would carry. Deadwood, stubborn, theatrical, sentimental, decided on a resting place with the kind of mischief only affection can justify next to Wild Bill. Some say friends did it as a joke because the living liked to tease the dead into company. They did not choose. Some say she had asked for it because love is a kind of gravity that prefers no empty chairs. Either way, the hill at Mount Maria accepted both stones and made them neighbors. Tourists came. They still come. They look at the pair of names and make the easy story. They look longer and make a better one, that a woman who kept rooms warm during sickness, kept roads safer by simply being on them, now keeps a small piece of ground warm by her presence. What do we keep of her? The laugh that didn't wait for permission, the hands that did what the room needed, the clothes that fit the work instead of the mirror. Contradictions the frontier teaches every honest soul, rowdy and tender, exaggerated and accurate, bruised and brave. If dime novels painted her in colors that didn't always match the weather, that is because posters must be seen from the far end of a street. Up close, she was the kind of person every hard place needs, a shoulder, a joke, a mule's competence with a softer bray. At night the cemetery's pines write their own psalms. Wind parts its hair around stone and says the syllables it has always said. Down in town, lights scatter like coins again. Someone tells a story about calamity that begins with swearing and ends with a blessing. It's the correct order. From Jane's bench, because every legend leaves behind a bench where the next traveler can rest. We watch a new figure ride in from the Indian Territory, wearing a star that fit as if it had been measured by Justice herself. Bass Reeves, tall, silent when silence handled the job. Thunder when thunder was the only grammar the day would accept.